Stations with delays at Salt Lake City up to 10 minutes as crews remove snow from the runways, and Seattle has fog problems this morning, so you might want to phone ahead.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Work crews are clearing Amtrak's busiest line, removing the wreckage of the ill-fated Colonial in a bid to restore train service in the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak says there will be limited service today between Washington and Philadelphia, but warns of continued delays. Safety investigators, meanwhile, confirm Amtrak's worst accident ever came because of a stoplight disobey.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Tuesday, January 6th. With Gene Randall in Washington and Marianne Loughlin and Bob Cain in Atlanta.
Good morning. A 10-year-old boy who spent the last 8 hours at gunpoint last night in Dallas was released last night by a gunman who demanded he be flown to Egypt. The standoff at a Delta Airlines terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport caused dozens of flight delays, cancellations, and reroutings. The hostage, 10-year-old Michael Caruso of Florida. He was traveling with his parents when the gunman grabbed him and took him into a boarding area. Witnesses said the man held a pistol at the boy's head. The suspect, identified as Salah Abu Qasim. He was described by airport officials as highly agitated. He reportedly fired at least one shot into the ceiling.
Pulled him through underneath the rope, and he did not realize he had a gun in his hand. Took the gun and put it to the little boy's head and said, "I've got the gun, I've got the gun." And the parents of the child were just about as stunned as everybody else.
He appears to be rational. He is talking with FAA, FBI, and airport public safety officers, and will continue to be interrogated by them for some time before he's transported to Dallas County.
Abu Qasim gave up around midnight after hostage negotiators led him to believe he would be allowed to leave the country. They took him into custody, and the 10-year-old was reunited with his parents, who had stood by just 100 feet away during the 8-hour ordeal. President Reagan undergoes a CAT scan today at Bethesda Naval Hospital to check for new signs of cancer. A separate test Sunday proved negative, and preliminary examination of tissue removed yesterday during prostate surgery also showed no evidence of malignancy. Today's is the last major test President Reagan is scheduled to undergo during his stay at Bethesda. The White House says Mr. Reagan will probably leave the hospital in a day or two to continue his recuperation at the Executive Mansion. According to ABC News, CIA Director William Casey has lost the ability to talk, walk, and move on his right side. Casey, who underwent brain surgery last month, officially is listed in stable condition, a report that has been unchanged since the operation. ABC says the administration has known for 2 weeks that Casey cannot return to work, that it's begun looking for a replacement. The 100th session of Congress opens at noon Eastern Time today. First order of business, procedural matters, including swearing-in ceremonies. New leadership posts will be filled with Democrat Jim Wright of Texas taking over as Speaker of the House from retired Thomas Tip O'Neill. Wright will celebrate Texas style with a big party on Capitol Hill, which will be beamed by satellite to a gathering of some 5,000 in Fort Worth. On the Senate side, Democrat Robert Byrd takes over as Majority Leader, as Republican Bob Dole of Kansas is downgraded to Minority Leader. For the first time in the Reagan presidency, the Democrats control both houses of Congress.
One of the first items of business for the new Congress will be picking up where the old one left off in the Iran-Contra investigation. Action on the controversy actually resumed yesterday. The old Senate Intelligence Committee voted to reject a presidential request to release its findings so far. Democratic leaders say releasing the report now with large gaps in the testimony would make it incomplete, misleading, and would limit the scope of the investigation. But outgoing chairman David Durenberger says he thinks the report should be made public, even though he says it won't be flattering to the administration.
The whole report is embarrassing to the administration, if you want to know the truth. I mean, the one person who's going to be embarrassed by this thing, if we could get it out, is the President of the United States. And yet, to his credit, he is the one who has consistently said, get it out.
The administration says it is outraged and disappointed by the committee's decision.
CNN has learned the DuPont Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico, had been cited for numerous fire safety violations in June of 1985, a year and a half before a fire that killed 96 people. There is no record the problems were ever corrected. The records show that on the day of the inspection, the fire alarm system was not working. There were no smoke detectors. Many of the exits were not marked, had poor lighting. In some cases, exits were even locked. Inspectors apparently also found the 20-story hotel had no evacuation or escape routes posted in guest rooms. And hotel employees were said to be unprepared to help in an emergency because they were not trained in using equipment like fire extinguishers. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that the New Year's Eve fire may have started when an arsonist ignited furniture stored in plastic wrapping in the ballroom area of the hotel. That paper quotes a federal investigator as saying the arsonist may have meant only to cause property damage and not to kill anyone. Meanwhile, 2 suits totaling $19 million were filed yesterday against the hotel, one by the family of a hotel worker killed in the fire, the other by a guest who had been injured. Fire swept through a Chicago apartment house early this morning, killing at least 7 people and forcing some residents to jump from windows. At least 5 people, in addition to those who died, were injured in the fire on the city's south side. Witnesses say they saw a man and a pregnant woman leap from windows and lie motionless on the pavement. And firefighters had to use ladders to rescue other residents hanging from ledges. One fire department spokesman described the fire as suspicious, but he did not elaborate.
It's 6 minutes past the hour. Amtrak crews are working to rebuild track in Maryland today at the scene of the railroad's worst accident ever. Rescue workers near Baltimore called off their search for bodies last night, leaving the death toll from Sunday's derailment at 15. Officials say the accident occurred when an Amtrak train slammed into 3 Conrail locomotives that ran a stop sign. Federal safety officials say the Conrail engineer saw the stop signal but did not have time to avoid the collision.
We have determined that the home signal for track number 1, on which the Conrail was proceeding, had a stop indication at or near the accident site, which is the home signal. We know this because the engineer who was operating the Conrail locomotive has told us that, and the other corroborative evidence at this point seems to speak unerringly to that. It seems also that the Conrail 3 engines ran through the light.
The accident destroyed about 1,000 feet of track in Maryland and is disrupting service in Amtrak's busy Northeast corridor. Amtrak says the railway will resume some service today between Washington and Philadelphia, but travelers are warned to expect delays. Those seeking more information on Amtrak service in the Northeast may call 1-800-USA-RAIL, USA, R-A-I-L.
A wave of public sector strikes in France has spread to the gas and electrical workers in the country today, causing some blackouts in Paris. The utility workers left their jobs in support of French railroad engineers who've been on strike for 20 days now in a dispute over wages and working conditions. The striking railwaymen are scheduled to march through Paris later today, while Prime Minister Jacques Chirac meets with his entire government to discuss the labor unrest. The disputes center on Chirac's proposed 3% ceiling on public sector pay raises.
The Pentagon is trying to identify a merchant ship that fired on a Navy helicopter in the Persian Gulf in international waters. Pentagon officials say the attack came yesterday as the helicopter approached the ship off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. The ship fired a single surface-to-air missile, which came within 500 yards of the helicopter. Defense Department sources say the ship then sailed into port before it could be identified.
This is Daybreak for Tuesday, January 6th, 1987. Let's get a preview of our weather for this day. Steve Kosch.
And Bob, looks like we're anticipating more snow in the northern Rockies.
This movie has been called the most realistic vision of the war in Vietnam.
If you're going to get killed in the Nam, it's better to get it in the first few weeks.
The movie's writer-director did his research as a foot soldier on the Cambodian border. Today, call in your comments to the creator of the hit movie Platoon at noon on CNN's Take 2.
Airports in the west, we find mostly cloudy skies with delays at Salt Lake City up to 10 minutes now because crews removing snow from runways, and Seattle delays because of fog.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
A man demanding to be flown to Egypt took over a terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport yesterday, threatening to kill a 10-year-old boy. Young Michael Caruso of Florida spent 8 hours as a hostage before negotiators ended the standoff. On Capitol Hill, the opening gavels for the 100th Congress today.
This is Daybreak on CNN for Tuesday, January 6th. With Gene Randall in Washington and Molly McCoy and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta.
A new Congress convenes here in Washington today, both houses controlled by Democrats for the first time since Ronald Reagan became president. Its leaders are virtually scrapping the president's day-old budget proposal and planning full-scale probes of the Iran arms controversy. But today's business is long on ceremony, short on controversy. When the Senate convenes, the majority leader will be West Virginia's Robert Byrd, who regains a job he held during the Carter presidency. Republican Robert Dole becomes minority leader. The House assembles at noon to swear in new members and elect Jim Wright of Texas as its new Speaker, 49th Speaker. Wright replaces Speaker Thomas Tip O'Neill of Massachusetts, who has retired. Another test for President Reagan today at Bethesda Naval Hospital, where the chief executive underwent prostate surgery yesterday. CNN correspondent Francis Hardin is standing by at the hospital this morning for an update on the president's condition and today's procedure. Francis?
Good morning, Gene. The president's doctors have scheduled a CAT scan for him today. This is a kind of computerized X-ray which allows physicians to view the body in cross-sections. The CAT scan will enable doctors to determine if the colon cancer Mr. Reagan had in 1985 has spread to any other parts of his body. Any malignancy would show up as a kind of shadowy dark area. According to White House spokesman Larry Speaks, if the CAT scan takes place this morning as expected, the results could be available by noon today. And still to come today will be the final report on the pathologist exam of the prostate tissue, which was removed yesterday. This report will be the result of a more detailed pathologist exam. The report, which was released yesterday, which indicated that there was no cancer in the prostate, was a result of a preliminary examination of frozen tissue. The White House says the president was conscious during yesterday's procedure and that afterwards he did paperwork and received some intelligence reports. In fact, the White House has repeatedly emphasized the routineness of these procedures, and especially the fact that Mr. Reagan has not been incapacitated. Francis Hardin, CNN Live at the National Naval Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland.
There is a report CIA Director William Casey still cannot speak, stand, or control the right side of his body following surgery to remove a brain tumor. ABC News says a quiet search has begun for Casey's replacement as CIA chief, as Casey will probably never be able to resume his job. Top contenders to run the CIA are said to be UN Ambassador Vernon Walters and former Senators Howard Baker and John Tower. The Senate Intelligence Committee has voted not to release a public version of its report on the Iran-Contra affair. Some Senate Republicans and the White House insist the move violates the public's right to know. But committee Democrats say the report, based on weeks of secret testimony, is incomplete and misleading. Outgoing Republican Committee Chairman Dave Durenberger says he is sure the report would help the public understand the Iran affair, despite the gaps.
The whole report is embarrassing to the administration, if you want to know the truth. I mean, the one person who's going to be embarrassed by this thing, if we could get it out, is the President of the United States. And yet, to his credit, he is the one who has consistently said, get it out.
But Durenberger's panel voted not to release the report. The White House says it is outraged and disappointed by that decision.
It's 4 minutes past the hour now. In Dallas, an 8-hour standoff with a gunman holding a 10-year-old boy hostage has ended with no injuries. Young Mike Caruso was snatched away from his parents at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport yesterday. Pointing a pistol at the child, the gunman demanded a plane take him to Egypt. He finally surrendered his hostage and his gun when he was told he could leave the United States.
He appears to be rational. He is talking with FAA, FBI, and airport public safety officers, and will continue to be interrogated by them for some time before he's transported to Dallas County. I think he was motivated by an interest in leaving the United States and returning to Egypt. I honestly don't know whether Egypt was his home, but that is where he repeatedly made reference to where he wanted to go.
The hostage drama in Dallas had a ripple effect on other airports. The siege began at a Delta Airlines ticket counter and tied up the whole Delta operation. 52 Delta flights were canceled. Others were diverted or delayed.
At least 7 people died. As many as 8 were injured when fire swept through an apartment house on the south side of Chicago early today. Fire officials labeled the blaze suspicious. Some people jumped from windows to escape the blaze. It took firefighters 2 hours to bring the fire under control. Crews have begun to rebuild the 1,000 feet of track torn up when an Amtrak train collided with 3 Conrail freight engines on Sunday. Work went on through the night at the site east of Baltimore, where 15 people died and more than 170 were injured. A dog was being used in the search for more victims, but no bodies have been found since early yesterday afternoon, and Amtrak officials say they doubt any more will be. Meanwhile, the National Transportation Safety Board says it has determined the Conrail engineer saw a stop signal just before the accident, but could not stop in time. There's speculation the sun may have interfered with his ability to see the signal, and there are questions whether another signal that would have warned him to begin slowing down was in the proper position. An Amtrak spokesman says limited service in the area affected by the accident will resume today. People with questions about Amtrak service in the Northeast Corridor can call a toll-free number, 1-800-USA-RAIL. That's 1-800-USA-RAIL.
French Prime Minister Jacques Chirac called a meeting of his cabinet today to discuss his government's growing confrontation with the labor movement. A nearly 3-week-old strike of train workers has crippled France's state-run rail system. And today the labor walkout spread when employees of the Postal Service, the Paris subway, and gas and electric companies launched a sympathy strike. Union rail workers are demanding negotiations on pay and working conditions, but Chirac says the French government will not make any concessions and will not raise wages because it would worsen inflation.
In the Philippines, peace talks between communist rebels and the government of Corazon Aquino resumed today. Negotiators have not yet agreed on an agenda for the talks. About 500 militant farmers showed support for the communists, raising clenched fists as the rebels entered the peace talks. Meantime, 2 communist rebels and a government soldier died in a shootout at an army checkpoint last night. The military says a rebel shot a soldier at a checkpoint 360 miles south of Manila. Other soldiers returned fire, killing the gunman and his partner. Leftist rebels in El Salvador have launched a new offensive against the U.S.-backed government. It follows a 7-hour battle yesterday in an agricultural district of the war-torn Morazan province. The army says it drove the rebels back after fighting that killed 4 soldiers, 2 civilians, and 22 guerrillas. That conflicts with reports by the rebels' underground radio, which says 5 soldiers were killed and 16 were wounded. The rebels, who refuse to recognize the government, currently hold no permanent territory.
The president of Mozambique is warning his people to stand guard for an invasion by South Africa. The official Mozambique news agency quoted the leader yesterday as saying South Africa is backing right-wing insurgents and threatening a direct attack against Mozambique. In the past, South Africa has raided what it said were black nationalist bases in Mozambique. Secretary of State George Shultz is scheduled to leave Washington today for a tour of 6 black African nations friendly to the United States. Shultz plans to carry with him a warning about a renewed Libyan threat to its neighbors. The State Department says Shultz plans to focus on Africa, economic reforms, and security concerns, the biggest of which is Libya. Libyan troops now occupy northern Chad and bombed the south of the former French colony on Sunday. The United States has agreed to provide Chad with military assistance, pledging to send $15 million.
Coming up at 9 minutes after the hour right now, and if you're one of those who likes your skiing steep and deep, you'd better head west. Head west to the Wasatch Mountains or Lake Tahoe. Lots of new snow. Here's Steve Kosch with the latest. Steve, good morning.
Right you are, Patrick. 42.5 inches of snow at Alta, Utah. And more snow continues today. And the Sierra Nevada mountain range, as we look at our precipitation outlook, does show that frozen precipitation will be coming down in the form of snow from Lake Tahoe northward. So adding to the basis significantly in the northern our business travelers advisory, we find mostly clear skies in most of the major airports. The delays to report to you are mainly due to traffic. Newark, for instance, morning traffic. Delays can be anticipated later this afternoon in Atlanta, and Miami has some fog problems now, but most of that will improve later this morning.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Tuesday, January 6th. With Marianne Loughlin and Bob Cain in Atlanta, Gene Randall in Washington, and Jeff Weiser in New York.
Good morning. Investigators say Conrail locomotives ran at least 1 stop signal before they were rammed by a speeding Amtrak train on Sunday. The collision near Baltimore killed 15 people in the worst accident Amtrak has ever had. It happened at a junction where 4 tracks merge into 2, and even a sophisticated new signal system failed to prevent disaster.
we have determined that the home signal 4-track number 1 on which the Conrail was proceeding had a stop indication at or near the accident site, which is the home signal. We know this because the engineer who was operating the Conrail locomotive has told us that, and the other corroborative evidence at this point seems to speak unerringly to that. It seems also that the Conrail 3 engines ran through the light, ran through the interlocking, and into track number 2, on which the Amtrak train with the 2 engines and 12 cars was proceeding.
Federal investigator Knoll says there was no time for the Conrail engineer to react when he saw the stop signal. But there remain questions whether a signal 2 miles before the crash scene was working properly. According to the Washington Post, the Conrail engineer says he got a false command at that first signal to proceed onto the track used by the passenger train. Investigators won't comment on that.
It now appears everyone in the accident, dead and alive, is accounted for. Dogs were brought in to help search for more victims at the very bottom of the wreckage where the cafe car lies crushed. But no more bodies have been found. And now attention has turned to clearing the wreckage and rebuilding about 1,000 feet of track ripped up by the accident.
Some Amtrak service between Washington and Philadelphia has resumed. Officials say they expect to have 12 trains running today, but no Metroliner service will be offered until tomorrow at the earliest. Until repairs are completed, Amtrak is warning that passengers should expect delays. Northbound and southbound trains will alternate using the same set of tracks. For more information on which trains are running, you can call Amtrak. The youngest victim of the Amtrak crash was only 7 years old, the oldest 71. Laura Cordy of New York City was 22 when she died on the train. Her husband, Jesse, is a 30-year-old actor, currently appearing in the Washington production of Les Miserables. He had just stepped backstage at the Kennedy Center for a scene change Sunday when a friend told him there had been an accident. Cordy told the Washington Post his first reaction was disbelief, but he went on with the final act of the play before finding out his wife had indeed been one of the victims. He learned later she had died.
Investigators reportedly believe an arsonist set furniture afire stored in plastic to start the fatal New Year's Eve fire at the DuPont Plaza Hotel in San Juan. 96 people died. Today's edition to the New York Times, quote, an unidentified federal investigator is saying the arsonist may have meant only to damage property, not to kill people. The newspaper says the burning of the plastic and the mostly synthetic furniture caused intense heat and toxic smoke. CNN has learned that past inspections of that hotel revealed fire safety deficiencies, a number of them, and the lawyer says the hotel may be liable if there were no smoke detectors.
It could create government liability for negligent inspection, or let's say they discovered an unsafe condition. Did they communicate it adequately to the hotel officials or the security officials? If they didn't, then there could be responsibility in that respect, yeah.
The families of 2 victims of the fire have already filed lawsuits against the hotel. Those suits seek $19 million in damages.
Fire swept through an apartment house in Chicago's South Side early today. Authorities say at least 7 people died in the fire and 5 others were injured. Officials described the fire in the 4-story brick building as suspicious. Witnesses say a man and a pregnant woman leaped from windows to escape the flames. A gunman who grabbed a 10-year-old boy at a Delta Airlines ticket counter and held him captive for 8 hours is in jail today. The gunman surrendered to police late last night. As CNN's Tony Clark has more on the ordeal at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport.
For 8 hours, police and FBI agents negotiated with the gunman, holding 10-year-old Mike Caruso hostage inside the airport terminal. The Middle Eastern gunman had grabbed the Florida boy from his family in an attempt to get a flight to Egypt. Witnesses said he took the boy, fired several shots into the air, then ran through the metal detector into the boarding area.
Took the gun and took it to the little boy's head and said, I've got the gun, I've got the gun. And the parents of the child were just about as stunned as everybody else.
The boy's father noticed that this guy was taking his kid away. He ran under the rope and ran after him. And the guy turned around and said, if you run any farther, I'm going to blow his head off.
Police evacuated everyone and sealed off the terminal. As the hours passed, an ambulance was brought in and a bomb disposal unit. At one point, a plane was brought to the terminal in an apparent ploy But as a spokesman for Delta said, the gunman was never allowed near it. Instead, policemen said the gunman paced around the boarding area with the child always at his side. Then, around midnight, police were able to talk the gunman into dropping his weapon. He was quickly surrounded, and the boy was freed.
I got a chance to see the boy. How was he?
Reaction.
I'll tell you what, he acted like it was no big deal. He was very tired, as you well imagine, but he is very happy so with also.
The young boy and his family were quickly taken away from the airport to meet with police investigators. They declined to talk directly with reporters, but through a spokesman, told of their relief that the incident was over.
We thank the Holy Father for the safe return of our son. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place.
Through the window, 10-year-old Michael and 6-year-old sister Rosie seemed to be doing all right. Their parents thanked the police for their work and their friends for their prayers. As for the gunman, identified as Sola Abdul Qasim, details of why he wanted to go to Egypt and why he chose to try to get there using a gun were not immediately known. Police negotiators told him they thought some way could be worked out to get him out of the country, and that led to his surrender. Tony Clark, CNN, DFW Airport.
The 100th Congress convenes in just a few hours, noon Eastern Time. The leadership in both houses, Democratic. CNN's Linda Taira is on Capitol Hill, braving our cold Washington temperatures this morning for a preview of what we can expect. Linda, good morning.
Good morning, Gene. When the 100th Congress is gavelled in at noon, it signals the start of a new era in the relations between Capitol Hill and Ronald Reagan. This is the Congress that Ronald Reagan will have to contend with for the last 2 years of his term in office. On the Senate side, it marks the return of the Democrats holding a 10-vote majority over the Republicans. The Democratic leader will be Robert Byrd of West Virginia. On the House side, it means a new Speaker of the House. Tip O'Neill is gone. Texas Representative Jim Wright takes over. The congressional agenda is crowded, and preliminary work is already underway on many pieces of legislation. First up is the president's trillion-dollar budget. At least the outlines of his proposal have already been submitted to Congress, and the House and Senate budget committees are studying them. Later this week, on Wednesday and Thursday, both panels will call in members of the president's cabinet to justify his budget request, to talk about why they want more for defense and less for social programs, and why they need another $100 for the Nicaraguan Contras. That issue is expected to bring an explosive showdown later in the year. Later today, resolutions will be introduced on both the House and Senate sides to formally set up select committees to investigate the Iran-Contra affair. Those resolutions will set up these committees in Watergate-style fashion. They will hold hearings probably in mid-February, picking up where congressional investigators left off in December. While the hearings may dominate much of the headlines this year, Congress does have a list of other work to do. Later this morning, Democratic senators are expecting to reintroduce a clean water bill. That bill was vetoed by the president last year. Also, senators and House members will be trying to pass a massive highway bill. That bill was stymied last year in the final days of the session. There will also be efforts to pass new trade legislation to cope with foreign competition. Also, arms control issues led by moves to renew compliance with the SALT II Arms Control Treaty, and issues such as corporate mergers, civil rights legislation, and also product liability problems will come up on the floors of the House and the Senate. All the action will start at noon. Linda Taira, CNN, reporting live from Capitol Hill.
Linda, before I let you get inside, where I'm sure it's much warmer, what effect do you expect to see from the Iran arms investigations? Will that have much of a paralysis effect on the rest of what Congress has to accomplish?
Gene, initially Congress was afraid that it might, and so that's why it moved to set up these Iran-Contra committees, these select committees, which will really try to contain any of the legislation that comes out of this. Of course, there will be some sort of seep over into the Nicaraguan Contra request aid for $100 million in the fiscal 88 budget, but I think both on the Senate and the House side, members don't want to appear as if they're capitalizing on just this Iran-Contra affair, may put a vote on the Contra aid off until later in the year. Overall, though, the Congress is trying very hard to show that it is not going to be paralyzed by the Iran-Contra affair, that is the White House's problem. Congress will deal with it as much as it can, but it has a host of other work it will do, and it will try to tackle it head on.
All right, Linda, thanks very much. We'll look for you again around noon. President Reagan is set for another medical test today to find out if there's been any recurrence of cancer. The president undergoes a three-dimensional X-ray known as a CAT scan of his internal organs. The White House is also expected to release results of laboratory examinations done on tissue taken during Mr. Reagan's prostate surgery yesterday. Today's CAT scan will be the final test in what is expected to be a week-long stay for Mr. Reagan at the Bethesda Naval Hospital outside Washington. We'll have a live update on the president's condition in just a few moments. There are reports CIA Director William Casey will probably not be returning to his job. ABC, quoting unidentified sources, says Casey is unable to walk, speak, or control the right side of his body. The CIA director underwent brain surgery last month for the removal of a tumor. Casey is listed in stable condition and is reportedly clear-minded and conscious, but the White House and CIA are refusing comment on reports the search for a new CIA director has been underway for 2 weeks.
It may be a while longer before we learn what happened during the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings on the Iran-Contra affair. The committee voted yesterday not to release a report on its work, despite a presidential request. Democratic leaders say the report is incomplete because of gaps in some of the testimony. But Republican leader Robert Dole says the report would put an end to some inaccurate stories about the controversy.
Coming up on Day Watch, a report on the New Jersey trial over who has a right to the baby of a surrogate mother.
And from Miami, the story of the city's efforts to shed its high crime image. All that and more when we return.
You have 30 minutes airtime.
On a job like mine, there's always a deadline, so I can't take...
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Tuesday, January 6th. With Molly McCoy and Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta, Gene Randall in Washington, and Jeff Weiser in New York.
A published report says a New Year's Eve fire at the DuPont Plaza Hotel in San Juan, Puerto Rico started in the ballroom. The New York Times, quoting a federal investigator, reports an arsonist set fire to furniture stored in plastic wrapping. The investigator says the burning plastic caused extremely dense, poisonous smoke. In a related finding, CNN's Tom Mintier reports the hotel hadn't had a fire inspection in quite a while.
A CNN investigation has revealed that the last official fire inspection of the DuPont Plaza Hotel occurred over a year and a half ago. On June 17, 1985, Fire Inspector Ricardo Rios Sanchez toured the hotel. What he found was a long list of problems. On that day, the hotel's fire alarm system did not work. There were no smoke detectors. Fire escape stairwells were not marked as exits, had poor lighting, and some exits from the stairwell were even locked. No evacuation plan or escape routes were posted in the guests' rooms. The inspector ruled the employees of the hotel were not able to help evacuate the guests and did not know how to use things like fire extinguishers or fire hoses.
We are in complete compliance with all local fire and safety regulations.
Hotel director Bruce Schulman is only partially correct. Fire officials say no hotel has ever failed an inspection. They are told what to correct. Unfortunately, there are only 18 inspectors in all of Puerto Rico. No records exist to prove the defects were ever fixed, or even if the hotel was re-inspected.
At this moment, the investigation is about to begin to see if there was a follow-up. In black and white, at this moment, there is nothing written.
The fire department says they don't have the power to close a hotel found in violation of fire codes, but they could take them to court. New legislation now being considered by the governor of Puerto Rico may give them that power and provide double the number of inspectors so that follow-up checks can be made. The apparent lack of a follow-up on the 1985 inspection may play a part in the many lawsuits now expected to be filed by guests of the hotel.
The director of the DuPont Plaza Hotel has indicated previously that some new smoke detectors had been installed in the hotel and that an insurance inspector had been brought to the premises within the past 6 weeks. But none of that information can be found in the San Juan Fire Department's files that will surely be receiving some scrutiny over the next few days. Tom Mintier, CNN, San Juan, Puerto Rico.
A report from the Ivory Coast says one of two men who survived a weekend plane crash that killed 49 other people died early today. State television reports he died on a plane en route to Paris for special medical treatment. He'd been badly burned in that crash. Hospital sources say the second survivor is out of danger now, although he too was badly burned.
The Soviet Union's foreign ministry spokesman, Gennady Gerasimov, told reporters in Moscow today the Kremlin is not against a summit meeting this year. Gerasimov said a meeting between Communist Party Chairman Mikhail Gorbachev and President Reagan would be acceptable if it produced results. October's summit in Iceland fell short of any major agreement. Soviet Prime Minister Nikolai Ryzhkov is in Helsinki today for talks with Finnish leaders. The two countries are working on a trade agreement and a pact guaranteeing early warning in the event of a nuclear accident. Finland received early heavy doses of radiation following the Chernobyl nuclear accident last spring.
Communist rebels and Philippine government officials resumed peace talks for a couple of hours today. When the meeting ended, they'd agreed in principle on an agenda to be discussed in a week. Both sides are under a 60-day truce, the first in nearly 18 years of communist rebellion. It expires on February 8th. One government negotiator says the talks will focus on four key issues: food, freedom, jobs, and justice.
Millions. Next on Take Two, right after the news. This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Hello, I'm Ralph Wenge. It's noon in the East, 9 on the West, and here's a look at some of the top stories we're following at this hour. President Reagan will be conducting some business from Bethesda Naval Hospital this afternoon, and he will undergo physical tests this evening. Doctors report that he's recovering very well from the operation yesterday to relieve pressure from an enlarged prostate gland. They say the test showed there was no cancer in the prostate. This evening, Mr. Reagan's internal organs will be given a computerized X-ray. The doctors are checking against a recurrence of the president's colon cancer. Amtrak resumes limited service today on the track where the trains collided on Sunday. Jeff Weiser has the story from our Northeast Bureau. We'll be getting to Jeff in just a moment. Right now, you are looking at the opening session of the 100th U.S. Congress. It is a day the Democrats reclaim both the Senate and the House. And it's the first time they've held a majority in both sides since President Reagan swept into office in 1980. The clerk gaveling the session into order right now. This is the day that Texas Congressman Jim Wright will officially become Speaker of the House, taking over from Tip O'Neill. And of course, throughout the afternoon here on CNN, we will keep you up to date on exactly what takes place in today's session, and of course throughout the week. As we said a moment ago, Amtrak is resuming limited service on the tracks where the train collided on Sunday. Jeff Weiser has more of the story now. Jeff?
That's right, Ralph. Amtrak spokesmen say crews worked through the night near Baltimore to clear 1,000 feet of track of twisted cars and power lines. New lengths of track were brought in today. The first train pulled very slowly through the crash site early this morning. Amtrak officials say they hope to resume near normal service by tomorrow. The first train was off schedule into New York this morning, but Amtrak officials say they are ignoring schedules today and only sending trains off as they fill up. Some passengers are satisfied with the resumed service.
It was fine. They stopped sort of briefly and slowed down around the area where the crash occurred. We looked out the window and looked at it. Right. There was a train pretty more ripped than I would have thought that they could be, but they had pretty well cleaned everything up.
Federal investigators are examining stop signals that should have alerted operators of the Conrail locomotives that collided with the Amtrak train. They want to see whether the signals could have failed.
Told that he could leave the country, a gunman who held a 10-year-old boy hostage for 8 hours at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport gave himself up. But the gunman is still in custody today in Dallas. The young boy was standing at a Delta Airlines ticket counter yesterday with his parents when the gunman grabbed him. The man then forced his way through a security gate and threatened to kill the child to be flown to Egypt. The boy's parents stood by as police negotiated for the gunman's surrender. After the ordeal, the Delta spokesman said the boy showed exceptional bravery.
I think he did an outstanding job to be with the suspect for 8 hours. He came back out to meet the family, and of course he was very, very tired, but he was very excited to see his family as well as they were to see him.
The incident snarled Delta service at the Dallas airport for much of the night. In Chicago, 7 people were killed when fire raced through a 4-story tenement on the city's south side. CNN's Luann Sanders looks at the investigation that is already underway.
Chicago fire officials are calling the early morning fire in this South Side apartment house suspicious. It spread quickly through the four-story building, filling the halls with thick smoke. 7 people were killed, including 3 children. The city's fire commissioner says 9 others were injured when they panicked and jumped out of windows to safety.
It started on the first floor on the stairway, traveled very rapidly up to the front stairway, trapping anybody that came out of their apartment that was warned by the smoke detector were caught in it. The majority of the people were caught right in the front of the building. They jumped out the front windows.
Officials say the fire looks like arson because of its intensity and rapid spread through the building. They say it may have been set by flammable liquids poured in the stairwell. This is one case in which smoke detectors may have worked against apartment dwellers. The alarm sent people out into the halls where they were overcome by thick smoke. Last year, 80% of all fire deaths in Chicago happened in homes not protected by smoke detectors. Luann Sanders, CNN reporting.
Meanwhile, investigators in San Juan, Puerto Rico now say they have enough evidence of arson in the DuPont Plaza Hotel fire to convict. They don't say they have a suspect in the New Year's Eve blaze that killed 96 people. One of the latest revelations comes from a San Juan Fire Department report. An inspection 19 months ago showed the hotel lacked smoke detectors, working fire alarms, and an evacuation plan. $19 million in lawsuits have already been filed. David Lois, as we mentioned just a while ago, the opening session of the 100th U.S. Congress takes place today, promises to be busy and pretty much a high-profile session of Congress because of all the issues that the congressmen are going to be taking up over a number of months now. And we'll be following those as the hours and weeks go by.
All right, Ralph.
Tuesday edition of Take Two. I'm Lois Hart.
And I'm Dave Walker. Later in the program today, we'll be talking with Oliver Stone. He is the writer and director of the new movie. It is called Platoon, about the war in Vietnam, and a lot of people are saying it's going to win an Academy Award, most likely, because of its very realistic depiction of the war in Vietnam, and a lot of people are saying that it's had a cathartic effect for Vietnam veterans.
First, though, today, the age of AIDS is upon us. President Reagan is requesting more than $500 million in his 1988 budget for AIDS research. Government and scientific reports warn the general public that celibacy or strict monogamy are the only sure ways to avoid contact with the deadly virus. And heterosexual men and women who once thought acquired immune deficiency syndrome was strictly a gay disease are worried. Love and romance, which already has its share of tensions, now has an ominous new dimension. What are today's men and women to do? Emily Post and Miss Manners move over. Dr. Leon McKusick is offering lessons in AIDS etiquette. Dr. McKusick is a research psychologist at the University of California at San Francisco. He's had a private practice in San Francisco's gay community for the last 8 years, and now he's editor of What to Do About AIDS. Welcome to Take Two.
Thank you.
How do you advise approaching this subject with a potential partner?
Well, in our research, we found that there are several things that help a person to reduce risk for AIDS. We did a study of several hundred gay men in San Francisco to see what indeed did cause men to reduce risk for AIDS and what indeed caused other men to continue to put themselves at risk for AIDS. Some of the things that we learned from this study we can probably apply across to the heterosexual population. One of the things that we found that was pretty consistent was that younger people have a tendency to be more impulsive, have a tendency to have more varied social and sexual contact, and consequently they may be more likely to be involved in risk activity for AIDS. We also operated on a model called the health belief model, and we found that some significant psychosocial factors influence whether or not one can reduce risk for AIDS, which is to say, have safe sex practices. The first one is self-esteem. People who have higher self-esteem or who care about themselves more are more likely to reduce risk. The second one is a concept called personal efficacy. It's a big word, and what it really means is one believes that one is able to enact the recommended safe sex practices. For example, one would be able to agree with the statement, I am able to negotiate using a condom with a sexual partner. The third concept is something called perceived threat. This is something that I believe that the heterosexual community is just beginning to be aware of. There is this threat out there called AIDS. They aren't too sure how severe it is, need to take an assessment as to whether or not it's a personal threat or whether it's a vague threat in the society, and then to act on that threat. Once one has an idea that one is at risk of contracting the AIDS virus, then one needs to come up with a plan of action as to how to go about doing that. The final thing, of course, is being aware of what the specific health guidelines are, what one can and cannot do sexually or in a sexual encounter that would transmit the AIDS virus.
So I guess to sum up, you'd have to say that the advice is just to be aware. First of all, to take stock of your own personality and decide that you're worth saving from disease.
That's right, yeah, and to have the self-esteem that says that you're worth it, indeed.
And the confidence that you have a right to ask somebody to protect you.
Most certainly. A lot of people have tried to figure out ways in which one could decide whether or not someone that they just met is from a risk group, which would...
Go ahead.
Which would take a fairly lengthy interview process. I can't imagine two people standing in a bar trying to figure out whether or not the other's in a risk group. The best thing to do, I think, is to, in a quiet moment, assess your own level of risk for AIDS. Probably most of the people who are watching this television show are not at risk for AIDS and probably won't be. And they can rest assured that they will never come in contact with the AIDS virus. These are individuals who've been monogamous for a long time or who are not terribly sexual or who live in areas where there's probably a very low incursion of the AIDS virus.
Would it be fair to say that if you have more than one sex partner regularly, that you are at risk and should take precautions?
I think if you have several sex partners a year in a context where where the sex is fairly casual, that you may want to do a little personal risk assessment.
Well, you know, all of this gets sort of back to the old business about women and pregnancy, where, you know, you could hear the couple making the date, let's say, in a bar, and what's going through the head is, well, if we decide ahead of time to use a contraceptive, we're really taking the romance out of it, and then the next step is, and if we take the romance out of it, it's all premeditated, and that makes me promiscuous. You know what I'm saying?
Right, yes. So, yes, if someone becomes more self-conscious about what one is doing, one might become suspect of having some judgments about it rather than just going with the flow. I think one of the things that we have used over the years to help us be sexual is a very powerful psychological structure. It's called denial. As long as I can deny what happened the next morning, or if I can deny what I'm doing at the time that I'm doing it, then somehow the emotions are more able to flow. However, what one requires to combat AIDS transmission is to challenge that denial and to be able to be much more frank about what one is doing sexually or what one intends to do sexually. So, and some people have indeed complained that it takes some of the romance out of the approach. However, when you think about the threat of AIDS and how powerful it is and how you basically don't want to come into contact with this virus, nor would you really want anyone else to come in contact with it, that certainly inspires a more interpersonally responsible or socially responsible way of thinking about dating. And in that sense, I think it also implies a certain amount more affection and trust towards your partner to be able to discuss these matters.
Do you think there are a lot of people out there with AIDS who are lying about it to prospective partners?
Who are lying about it for what reason?
Well, to any prospective partner, for whatever reason. Do they tend to lie if they're exposed?
I tend to think that's not the case. Most of the people who I have encountered, I'm a psychotherapist, most of the people who I have encountered who have AIDS or have very strong reactions to having this disease. It's a very powerful disease. For one thing, it's a libido-killing disease in the sense that it really does not make people want to be particularly sexual.
So that if a prospective partner says, do you know I don't have AIDS, you can be pretty sure that he's telling the truth?
Well, I think it has to come a little bit earlier than that. People who are newly seropositive are the ones, which is by seropositive, I mean people who have most recently come into contact with the AIDS virus and have the AIDS virus living in their blood. Those are the people who we really need to target because it's the largest group, and it's also the group that some theorists believe has the strongest amount of live virus in their system which can be transmitted.
Dr.
So
McKusick?
those people yes.
We are going to take a short break here, but I want to come back with our viewer phone call question.
Okay.
Dr. Leon McKusick is with us on the subject of how to handle the subject of AIDS in potential sexual encounters. And we have our first caller on the line now from Orange, California. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a question for the doctor. I've been in a relationship for about 9 years now. I'm in a monogamous relationship, and I'm a heterosexual. Recently, we came into an encounter with a person that their partner has recently died of AIDS. And having this person over and socializing, the concern is the proper etiquette, if any, or if my family is at risk, and maybe how I should handle the situation. I don't want to certainly.
You're asking about non-sexual contact here.
Yeah,
okay.
But on the other hand, we don't want to damage the relationship in any way.
Okay, Dr. McKusick?
Yeah, one of the things that's very clear about the AIDS transmission is that AIDS is not casually transmitted. To the extent that you can serve dinner to someone, certainly not sharing the same eating utensils, but in the same environment, it's not casually transmitted whatsoever. This points to something that I think you were asking in your question, which is how do I maintain this friendship and maintain the closeness with this person who I care about, even though I might be a little scared about transmitting AIDS or protecting my children. One thing to do would be to tell this person that you do care about them, to be reassured just from this information I just gave you that you cannot catch the disease from him. But you might want to talk to him about how the disease does scare you. I'm sure he's probably just as scared, if not 3 or 4 times as scared, and perhaps the two of you would have a basis for good communication and getting closer.
Okay, next call. Go ahead, please. You're on take 2, Michigan.
Yes. I've only been married for a little time, and my husband likes to have anal sex sometimes, and it scares me, and I start crying sometimes because I think I'm going to catch AIDS. So I don't want to hurt his feelings or nothing, but yet, I don't know. You know what I should do?
Dr. McKusick?
Yeah, you may want to have a frank discussion with your husband about the issue of safe sex. If you ask yourself about your own past sexual practices and the kind of partners that you may have had in the past, you may think that you yourself are at risk, or you may want to have him ask the same questions of himself. Has he had multiple partners in the past? In which case, either one or the other, you might be carrying the AIDS virus. If based on that self-assessment, you think that might be the case, each of you may want to go and get an HIV antibody test to see. If you're both antibody negative, there's no concern except other potential trauma in engaging in anal intercourse. The AIDS virus won't be transmitted if it's not there. However, it might be wise to use condoms in all forms of sexual intercourse just to be safe.
Next call. Go ahead, please. You're on take 2, Beacon, New York.
Yes, sir. I come from a high-risk state in New York where AIDS is quite prevalent. I have a problem with the fact that many people like myself who are straight males have a lot of frustration and friction just dealing with women nowadays without the risk of AIDS. Mm-hmm. How can you maintain intimacy with a woman or approach a woman nowadays? I mean, you don't ask her to take a HIV pill or something like that. It's very difficult, and I was wondering, how do you maintain a desire to be young and virile and without wanting to put yourself in a very envious and a very risky position?
Well, this seems to be the dilemma of the 80s. First of all, there's no pill that one can take to hold down the impact of HIV that has not yet been developed. I think what you're saying is, should she take an HIV antibody test to prove to you that she's negative for the virus? What you may find is that in the age of AIDS, you may need to place more emphasis on the social and the emotional
aspects of relationships and less on the sexual, particularly at the beginning. If you meet a woman that you like and you want to spend time with her and then you want to go to bed with her, you may need to develop more trust between you. I think this is something that happens anyways in the course of the dating situation. However, what AIDS does is highlights the issues that come up around being penetrated and how much trust needs to be involved in order for that to transpire. So I guess men in some ways have to be a little bit more patient and a little bit more charming and cavalier as they approach women these days.
Dr. McKusick, thank you for joining us today on Take Two. The book is called What to Do About AIDS.
Thank you.
Coming up next on Take Two, the story of two nuns who disagree with the Catholic Church stand on abortion.
If you're taking more...
Possible areas of precipitation, mainly snow going on across parts of the upper Mississippi Valley, and out west, well, along the coastal sections here, it's mainly rain, but, well, we don't have to go too far inland there for that rain changing into snow. Some of that is quite heavy. Complete weather update during the International Hour, and that's coming up next.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
Investigators in San Juan say they have enough evidence to prove that fire at the Hotel DuPont was malicious. They say they have enough evidence to obtain convictions. And 34 guards are injured, 3 seriously, as 24 inmates stage a riot on the roof of this prison in Glasgow, Scotland. Good afternoon, and welcome to the International Hour. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And from CNN headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Ralph Wenge.
And I'm Donna Kelley. There are charges today that South African police helped a group of black rioters attack a ghetto community. The rioters, members of a conservative group, attacked members of an opposing radical group. 2 black radicals were killed and many homes were vandalized. The violence occurred Sunday, and today residents who witnessed the attack say that South African police escorted the conservative group into the ghetto and watched as the trouble worsened. A white human rights activist working in the area said there was no question the police sanctioned the operation. The South African government will not comment.
Secretary of State George Shultz left Washington this afternoon for an 8-day tour of sub-Saharan Africa. He's scheduled to make a major speech in Senegal, the first of 6 African nations he'll be visiting. He will urge the region to press ahead with free market growth, and he'll talk about Libya's aggression, including its occupation of half of the nation of Chad.
The chief of the Puerto Rican Fire Department is ordering inspections of all hotels on the island. That in the wake of the fire at the DuPont Plaza Hotel, which killed 96 people. Reports from San Juan say investigators have concluded that the fire was started by an arsonist who ignited furniture covered in plastic wrapping. Investigators say they may have enough evidence to get a conviction in the case, but they're refusing to say whether they have any suspects.
President Reagan says he's hoping he gets to leave Bethesda Naval Hospital as early as Thursday. He told reporters in his first public appearance since he entered the hospital Sunday he's feeling fine. His doctors say the polyps removed from his colon are not cancerous. No cancer either in the tissue removed from his prostate on Monday. He and the First Lady joked in this brisk air for a brief time. Earlier today, he met with his Chief of Staff, Donald Regan, and National Security Advisor Frank Carlucci to carry on some regular presidential business. Among that business, calling new congressional leaders as they go back to work today. White House spokesman Larry Speaks says the president is outraged, deeply disappointed, deeply concerned that the Senate Intelligence Committee will not make public the report on its hearings into the Iran-Contra affair. The White House says a declassified version of that report is available, but the lawmakers on Capitol Hill say they will let the newly named Senate Select Committee decide how to handle that documentation. As the new Senate began its work today, new Minority Leader Bob Dole of Kansas said he hopes the issue will not bog down the work of Congress.
As the Republican leader in the Senate, as a supporter of the president, and as a citizen, there is no one more committed than I to getting all the facts out. And I would say again today we could start by releasing the report of the Intelligence Committee. Let the public know. We shouldn't be afraid to let the public know what's been declassified. Its information ought to be in the public domain. And again, I would urge that somehow we might accomplish that in the next few days. The Republicans on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today voted 7-0 to keep Richard Lugar of Indiana as the ranking GOP spokesman for the next 2 years. Jesse Helms of North Carolina suffered a major slap. He had challenged Lugar for the position, saying it is his right under the Senate seniority system. Lugar says Senate rules were changed several years ago to allow members to disregard seniority. Lugar served as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in 1985 and 86. Helms says he will challenge the vote before the full Republican caucus. Helms did not appear for today's committee vote.
China's Communist Party newspaper has hit back at criticism from students campaigning for democracy. Yesterday, students in Peking burned copies of the newspaper People's Daily. They said the paper had distorted the goals of their recent protests. But today, the People's Daily says students are naive to demand more democracy and freedom of expression. An editorial says the protesters have fallen victim to bourgeois ideas. It says the unrest shows the need to stress communist values. Vietnam says it has crushed an attack by Chinese forces and killed nearly 500 of the enemy. Vietnamese news reports say the Chinese thrust south yesterday inside the Vietnamese border. Hanoi Radio claims that the Chinese fired thousands of rounds of mortar and artillery before they returned back. Though both China and Vietnam are communist, their relations are poor and border clashes are frequent. But if Vietnam's account is true, the fighting may be the worst in several years. There has been no comment from China.
The military government in Chile has lifted a 4-month state of siege. President Augusto Pinochet has imposed the state of siege after communist rebels tried to kill him. He gave authorities sweeping power to arrest dissidents and censor the press. Pinochet says his decision to let the declaration expire is a gesture toward national unity. But opposition leaders say it may be more of a gesture toward the Vatican before a scheduled visit by Pope John Paul.
The Soviet Union said today it does not oppose a possible summit meeting between Mikhail Gorbachev and President Reagan this year if it produces positive results. The announcement came from Foreign Ministry spokesman Gennady Gerasimov. The last meeting between Gorbachev and the president was held in Reykjavik last October. It broke down over the president's plans to develop his strategic defense initiative. On another front, Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze today called on Afghanistan's Muslim rebels to respect the ceasefire offered by Afghan leader Najibullah. That according to a report from the official TASS news agency. Shevardnadze spoke in Kabul last night, and he said Mikhail Gorbachev sent him to Afghanistan to support the peace drive.
The new year is bringing a new life for a Soviet woman who's been allowed to leave Moscow for San Francisco to be with her husband. CNN's Peter Arnett tells the story.
6,000. Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
Once again, our top story. Witnesses say South African police escorted a mob of heavily armed black conservatives into a township and watched as the mob beat young black radicals. The police refused to comment on the report, but they did say 2 black youths were killed in factional fighting in the township.
The British government is upset with the British Medical Association. The problem is over who should be allowed to donate blood. Now, the reason is a concern over the disease AIDS. The Medical Association doesn't want blood donations from anyone who has had casual sex with more than one partner during the past 4 years. The government says that recommendation could cause blood banks to run dry. CNN's Peter Humey has more from London.
The Medical Association's announcement came as a surprise and has immediately sparked a huge row. It's long been known that giving blood does carry the risk of spreading the AIDS infection, but stringent tests on the samples are carried out. Existing criteria also lists those who should not donate blood. The list includes drug users, homosexuals, and some haemophiliacs. Effectively, the new recommendation would now also add to the list anyone who's had casual sex with more than one partner over the past 4 years. But wouldn't the new measure virtually dry up blood supplies?
There's no reason why we have to be short of blood in this country at all. There are many people in the population who don't give blood at the moment. And I hope that if somebody who cannot have AIDS because they are in a stable, monogamous relationship, in other words, they have sex with somebody who only has sex with them, I hope very much that people in that sort of group will come forward and give blood.
Nevertheless, news of the recommendation has worried doctors working in the blood donor services. They say they are aware of the risks, but that a further reduction in those being able to donate blood could have disastrous consequences. As for the government, its chief medical officer argues that existing precautions, though not infallible, are sufficient safeguard.
Anyone who's in the risk groups is advised strongly not to give blood, and our donors are extremely responsible, and we've only had 60 out of 3 million donors who have given blood while being in the risk groups.
Whether the British Medical Association's new guideline will keep some potential blood donors away remains to be seen. But for the time being, the government argues that the lack of emergency blood supplies could pose a more immediate threat to health than the risk of spreading the AIDS virus through transfusions. Peter Humey, CNN, London.
Joining us here in our Washington Bureau to talk about this new screening program in Britain, Dr. Gerald Sandler, Associate Vice President of the American Red Cross. He's partly responsible for working out blood donation guidelines in this country. He's also a member of the International AIDS Task Force. Casual sex guidelines, how are they applied in the United States, Doctor?
Well, I would say that what we've tried to do in the United States is measure the responses of people who have positive antibody tests who've come in to donate, interview them, and determine what it is that has been their risk behavior, then set up guidelines based on the experiences in this country. We have no guidelines for casual sex. I think it's a threat. I think we all know that back in 1977, when the epidemic appears to have begun in the United States, there was a confined group of male homosexuals and IV drug users and no heterosexuals involved. And since 1977, there has been a movement from that very confined group in 1 or 2 cities perhaps to multiple cities, to an international scale, and then to broader groups. And at the present time, 4% of all persons with AIDS in the United States are heterosexuals. They acquired the AIDS virus infection through heterosexual contact. So there's movement. Our guidelines for blood donation are intended to be safe, with a very wide margin of safety around them. But as was pointed out on that interview that we just saw, if one takes an excessive guideline, one beyond which is needed for safety, then you get into the area of threatening the adequacy of the supply of blood.
And if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is the guidelines you do have are based on the data originally gotten from that small group.
No, we actually are monitoring day by day where the AIDS virus is moving in the donor population. To date, in the United States, 20 million blood donors have been tested by the FDA-licensed AIDS virus antibody test. The American Red Cross has done half of these, or 10 million AIDS virus antibody tests. We have the characteristics of the people who are infected, and we monitor that regularly. In addition, if a person is detected after having come to a blood center, passing our educational and screening procedures, he's detected to be positive by the test, we try and interview the person, and we ask, what is it that we've done that's caused us to fail to get you to defer yourself? And on the basis of those interviews, we make updates. Perhaps the most recent update is a little card that's given to every donor after they're through the process, and it says something like this. If after all of this, you think that you perhaps should not be donating blood, check off on this form, I should not be giving this blood for a transfusion. Fold the form over and put your number on, there's a little sticker, and then confidentially your unit won't go into use. So there are a whole variety of ways that we can exclude people who either fit into a category or have some reason to think perhaps they shouldn't be donating blood.
Mainly this is done on the honor system?
Well, I think the bottom line is yes. You have to really depend upon a person to give you a truthful health history. In fact, if you look at the whole issue of safety of blood, that's where the key is. The key is a volunteer donor, a person who came to give blood with no motivation other than helping somebody else. And that's the way to get a good, safe, adequate, thorough health history.
So your guidelines are based on your day-to-day testing, the most recent data that you do every day.
That's correct. Let me give you an example of how that worked. There was a time very early on in this that we had a guideline that said male homosexuals should not give blood. That was the guideline. We were detecting men who came in to donate and had a positive test. We interviewed them. And we said, what have we done that's caused you to not identify that you should give blood? And men said to us, well, I have had sex with another man. I'm not a male homosexual, but I've had sex with another man, so I gave blood because I'm not a homosexual. We understood from that it was difficult for a person to make the transition from having had sex with a man to identifying himself as a male homosexual. I was written. We changed the guideline, and the guideline now reads...
You changed the guideline or the wording?
Well, we changed the wording in this case. We adjusted the wording, and we said a man who has had sex with another man should not donate blood. And similarly, there was a survey not too long ago that showed that prostitutes have had tests for AIDS virus antibody, and in some cities, rather high incidence, as you might expect, because they don't know the sexual history of their sexual partners. We've recently excluded all male and female prostitutes as blood donors based on that update information.
Did you change the wording in that instance for females too?
Yes, we've adjusted the wording in that and others as the time is appropriate.
What's the wording on that?
For females, we've said that if you are the heterosexual partner of a male or female prostitute, you should not give blood within, if that's encounters occurred within the past 6 months. Rather detailed list, which I have here. It's sort of hard to come up with the exact words, but that's the gist of it.
We're fast out of time, but before you leave us, one question. What would happen, we saw and heard Peter Humey's report just before you came on, what would happen if the United States officials concerned about that blood supply extended the criteria to 4 years out of casual sex, such as the Brits have done?
That won't happen. I'll tell you why it won't happen in this country. There are meetings almost on a weekly basis between the government agencies, the American Red Cross representatives, and representatives of the medical community dealing with AIDS, sharing information, so that with these open lines of communication, the kind of preemption of one sector's responsibility by another sector's is not going to happen in this country. 4 years is not an appropriate guideline, nor is the British guideline appropriate for this country, and such an action by one of the groups in this country won't happen and preempt the blood guidelines.
Dr. Gerald Sandler, Associate Vice President of the American Red Cross. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Donna, Ralph?
Just ahead of the CNN International Hour, the Philippine government and the communist rebels are running into some problems over an agenda.
And we'll have a report on a standoff at a Scottish prison.
Corner there of Arizona, it'll be in the 60s. I'll have a complete weather update for you coming up inside of CNN's Newswatch, and that's coming up next.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Pleasure. A new medical report issued a short while ago does not bode well for CIA Director William Casey, just weeks after CIA Director underwent surgery for brain cancer. Hello, this is Newswatch. I'm Lou Waters in Atlanta.
And I'm Mary Alice Williams in New York. Doctors have broken their silence over the CIA Director's medical condition, confirming he has trouble speaking, has weakness on his right side, and has begun radiation treatments for cancer. Frank Sesno is at the White House with this report. Frank?
Mary Alice, doctors say that William Casey is in stable condition, but as you pointed out, they confirm that he has had difficulty speaking, he's had difficulty with what they call right-sided weakness, and that he has in fact begun radiation treatment, radiation therapy that will continue now for what they say will be a number of weeks for cancer. The doctors, however, say that both of Casey's predominant physical problems right now, the difficulty with his speech and the difficulty with movement on the right side of his body, have been slowly improving since his surgery on December 18th. And officials say at the hospital that unless there's significant change, they won't be issuing any more statements at all. Meanwhile, White House Chief of Staff Donald Regan says that as far as Casey is concerned and any possible successor, there are no plans right now to replace Casey. This is these reports surface that Casey is having a slower than expected recovery from this very serious surgery that he underwent some weeks ago. Officials here at the White House say that President Reagan does not want Casey to be reading about searches for a possible successor. Casey is a longtime friend of the president's. The president feels a great deal of loyalty to him, And beyond that, the president wants for now Donald Regan not to conduct a formal search for a Casey successor. So right now, the attitude is low-key everything, toward the condition of the CIA director, to say that things remain in abeyance for now. There is no formal search underway for a new CIA director, but officials say, should one be needed, they could come up with one rather quickly. Mary Alice?
Frank, the acting director, has he been brought into the briefing process much as Casey would have been had he been well enough to be in that position?
Well, in fact, the subject of Robert Gates, the acting CIA director right now, has come up with officials here. They say he is very much up to speed, he's very much in charge, and because he is so in charge, there's no real sense of urgency to make any major structural changes at the CIA, given the uncertainty surrounding Casey's condition.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Frank Sesno at the White House. The 100th Congress is now in session, and it's likely to be much less friendly to Ronald Reagan than the 99th. CNN's Linda Taira explains why from Capitol Hill.
The White House sent Vice President George Bush to greet the 100th Congress, now fully controlled by the Democrats. For the first time in 6 years, a Democratic majority was sworn into the Senate. In the House, Speaker Jim Wright took the oath of office to lead the Democrats and carry on the tradition of Tip O'Neill. From Bethesda Naval Hospital, where he is resting from surgery, President Reagan talked by phone to the new leaders at the 100th Congress.
The Senate has established a quorum and is ready to do business.
But the ceremony gave way quickly to the reality, with Congress and the White House at odds over the biggest crisis to face this administration.
We begin the business of the nation in an uncertain and unsettled time. The Iran misadventure has hurt the presidency, made a shambles of American foreign policy.
If there was still any hope of a political honeymoon, it was dashed when Democrats and Republicans immediately reintroduced the Clean Water Bill, which President Reagan vetoed last year after Congress had adjourned.
I hope upon reflection that the president will see fit to approve of it. And should he decide to veto this bill, I believe the Congress will override that veto.
And on day one of the 100th Congress, the president's $1 trillion budget was also under fire.
Well, I think we're going to have a very interesting year and 2 years. I do think the president started off on the wrong foot with his budget.
There are other issues which Congress promises to work on, which will set up a confrontation with the White House. They include trade legislation, aid to the Nicaraguan Contras, arms control, and problems in the Farm Belt. The 100th Congress also plans to deal with such diverse issues as civil rights and corporate takeovers. It all adds up to a big fight with the White House, and the Democrats say it will no longer be business as usual. Linda Taira, CNN, reporting live from Capitol Hill.
As the 100th Congress gets underway, a major skirmish is brewing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where outgoing committee chairman Senator Richard Lugar said today he has the confidence of the Republicans on the panel to be the next chairman, but he's facing stiff opposition from North Carolina Senator Jesse Helm, who also wants that post. Helm said, not chairman, the ranking member, I should say. Helm says he will ask Republicans to choose him over Lugar. He says the job is his by right because he's been in the Senate longer than Lugar. President Reagan telephoned his congratulations from the hospital today to the newly elected leaders of Congress, but even as he was exchanging pleasantries with them, Mr. Reagan was doing battle with the Senate Intelligence Committee over the Iran-Contra investigation. CNN's Charles Bierbauer reports the president's recovery from prostate surgery is going more smoothly than his relations with Congress.
The president's first appearance after Monday's prostate surgery was at a window of the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Feeling fine, said the president, but he's not so happy about the last act of the 99th Congress. Monday, the Senate Intelligence Committee denied his request to release a staff report on closed-door testimony.
Is this the point that Congress should release that report sent to me? Yes, I am.
The debate carried over into the first session of the new 100th Congress.
In my view, the president is correct. I mean, we shouldn't try to manage what the public should hear.
Well, but Harry, it's all going to be revealed. Everything is going to be made known.
The Senate committee report declassifies much of last month's testimony. That includes Marine Colonel Oliver North's chronology of the Iran arms sale. The White House has the same chronology but will not release it. White House spokesman Larry Speake says the North chronology has factual errors refuted by other testimony. Was North lying? Another administration official says the White House does not want to say that, but would prefer to have someone else pass judgment. The president will still be burrowing out of the Iran arms affair when he gets out of the hospital. He met there with his new national security advisor, Frank Carlucci, and Chief of Staff Donald Regan. When the First Lady arrived, the president said he felt fine.
When are you getting out?
Oh, I think maybe day after tomorrow.
So far, the president has gotten a clean bill of health for his prostate surgery and in a checkup of the colon where cancer was found in 1985. The final procedure before he can come home is a CAT scan to see if cancer has shown up in any other organs. Charles Beerbaugh, CNN, the White House.
The stock market continued its move into record territory today. On the strength of heavy volume during an up and down day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at 1970.